It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Cyd Harrell. I'm just going to read this bio so we're all have a bit of context. So Cyd Harrell is a UX researcher and a product manager who got interested in civic tech and in the early 2010s at hackathons, which is so exciting and so interesting. And when Facebook bought her employer in 2012, she chose to invest her career in public service technology work. Cyd has helped US city, county, federal, and state agencies unlock the power of technology to serve constituents. She has worked independently with the Center for Civic Design, Code for America, and 18F. And over the years, Cyd has been a mentor and leader to many people in the field, and she's proud to have served as the first chief of staff at 18F. She's dedicated to a more inclusive, more capable, and better coordinated civic tech movement. And Cyd lives in San Francisco with her husband and daughter, and we're just so excited to have Cyd with us. And this is new for us. We're doing a Civic Tech TO book club. We've never really done this before in this way, so we're going to dive into a little bit of a chapter 5 from her book, Civic Technologist Practice Guide. So we're hoping to get into innovations and what it means what this concept of bureaucracy or the stewardship means, or the role of prototypes. If this intrigues you, if you haven't had a chance to buy her book, she's graciously given us a code to get it at discount on EPUB. And it just wouldn't feel right if we didn't officially introduce Cyd with a haiku. So Emily, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and sharing your haiku with the group.
Honored to be part of this process, Skydra. I'll just say, please welcome Cyd with applause and questions because we can't share pizza.
I love it. Thank you so much, Skydra and Emily. It's fantastic to be here, coming from my kitchen in San Francisco, but feeling now like I'm in Toronto with a lot of you. So that's awesome. I brought just a few slides because I'd rather get into the Q&A, but Sam and Skydra made the suggestion that just talking a little bit about who the heck I am and why I wrote this book might be a good way to get into the questions involved in chapter 5, which is about innovation and why it's a slippery and difficult concept in a lot of ways. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you're seeing my screen. Excellent. Okay. Before I introduce myself with a GIF, I found a little while ago the post-it I posted at the first unconference in civic tech that I actually contributed to, and it says, user experience, citizen experience, how to get ideas and data from the public and how to get the design and research community involved. I put it up on an unconference board. This is in 2011 at City Camp San Francisco. So we're coming up on 10 years. Uncertain whether anybody would be into this because I thought maybe this was for people who coded. And I ended up having something like 40 people turn up in a tiny little conference room and having to share this overview of user research kind of in the round because there were so many people and I got dizzy doing it. 10 years later, on a very interesting day here in San Francisco when our sky turned the color of the sky on Mars, my first copies of my book, A Civic Technologist Practice Guide, arrived. That was last September 9th, and I don't think we'll ever forget it here. So since that time, I've been to one degree or another involved in civic tech, giving my entire career in a very quick GIF. I don't know why the polls popped up, showing you how I went from wanting to be a ballerina to thinking I wanted to be a book publisher to doing something that at least made me some money in financial services tech to consulting in UX to actually consulting in civic UX. I went to this first hackathon in 2010, and the first one I dared to contribute to, like I said, was 2011. But the first formal civic tech work I did was when Dana Chisnell invited me to contribute by taking the research lead for the 7th volume in the Field Guides to Ensuring Voter Intent, which is a little series that she created and designed in 2012. It's now actually in the Cooper Hewitt Museum at the Smithsonian as a design that makes a difference example. I will post a link a little bit later, but I was really honored to be part of that. And by 2013, I managed to convince Code for America to fire me, not without a couple of abortive attempts where they said, we're not sure why we'd have a UX person on staff. You seem cool, but that doesn't seem to quite fit where we're thinking of going. But we figured it out. We tried it out first for 6 months. I ended up joining and having a great 3 years there. And when I left at the end of 2015, seemed like an interesting time to go to the US federal government. We had these two agencies, the United States Digital Service and 18F. It looked like we were going to have a presidential transition in the next year, and I thought that would be very interesting to see. I got quite a bit more than I bargained for on that front. And I served a term until May of 2018, and for about the second half of that was the chief of staff at 18F. When I wasn't chief of staff, I was a lead in this department that was about strategy, so whether design or technical or business strategy. And now my biggest consulting gig, though I have a few others, is with the California court system. So I've had to learn all over again what the judicial branch is like and how technology functions within it and how the different incentives align for people to serve the public that way. And now here I am, copy of the object. I have some good quotes in the innovation chapter marked out that we can talk about when we get there. But I'm so glad you reflect on what is civic tech at each meeting, because that was already in my slides. So perfect. I am definitely not here to tell you one right way, but I have a couple of opinions. One of them is that we want to access services and exercise rights and make communities with all the ease and respect that not just random digital technology, but the best digital technology can afford. And further, if we are part of We Civic Tech, we want public digital goods as good as the ones made by commercial entities, even if they're somewhat different. And we want public digital infrastructure that's as good too. In North America, there's been this interesting convergence that I think differs a bit from how European civic tech has evolved, which involved municipal branches. There was a lot of interesting work, in Canada at the Vancouver municipal website around 2010, 2011. That was probably the best municipal website on the continent. And a lot of work at provincial levels before the federal services got established. Although I will also shout out the country of Canada for its early web experience toolkit, which was one of the few things I found in the early 2010s when I was looking for real government digital assets. In the US, this sort of rescue impetus behind the founding of the federal agencies and their connection to more academic and sort of think tanky directions, whereas the municipal movement came largely from volunteer groups, has made these kind of two strains of culture in the field that are just negotiating their way to how we're going to be in 2020 and in the 2020s. And one of the things I want to call out about civic tech in particular is that it has an explicit goal to build capacity in government, not just to make better things, but to help government have the capability to do better in these channels on its own. Many of you will probably recognize some of these project types, things from delivering actual services to creating better infrastructure through opening data and building cloud services and APIs and maybe identity services and that sort of thing. Tools that are specific to government, sometimes mutual aid projects, and a lot of things around citizen engagement for community planning, voting, community connection. And there are a lot of places that we can engage with an organization. So there's sometimes a question of what is tech about this? If we're writing new content, does that count? What if we're teaching people how to do user research, which is not very technical, but is recognized as a tech discipline? Well, if we're creating forms or templates, depending on how we're doing it, well, then we're definitely doing tech. If we're replacing a publishing system or a database, or integrating a new database or writing APIs, we are really definitely doing tech. And then sometimes the results or even the foundation of all those things is getting the multiple groups to work together better. and to work more in the ways, and I don't want to claim that the private sector tech industry always does these things well, but some of the best and most effective groups have figured out some things about how to work on the web or as software development teams that are sometimes useful to import. And there's a set of questions that I like to ask myself in engagements, just thinking about different goals that I might have related to creating better experiences for the public, or creating better public digital infrastructure, or building capacity for government agency I'm working with. You know, if I wanted to relieve the most pain for end users, I might do one thing. If I wanted to relieve pain for maintainers and stewards, if I wanted to free up capacity for people who, say, have to create a complicated Excel spreadsheet and transmit it to another department where they have to re-enter it, even though the public will never see that directly, maybe I could act to relieve that, and maybe that would have benefit for everyone. What if I wanted to make the longest lasting change possible? And then what if I wanted to make a change that I knew was going to have support and where I had access to the people who work on it? So all of these things are ways of doing civic tech, and you can kind of make a matrix of those with the types of projects when you think about just a small slice of what's possible. And that's kind of before you even get into the different levels of government, from federal to provincial or state to municipal. It's actually a really complex field, which is part of what leads me to this idea that we sometimes are a bit impatient in tech, and we think about, well, we're going to fix this in 6 months. And I like to think of the idea of bringing government to be responsive to the public and using technology to the best effect in fulfilling its responsibilities and duties as a longer project, 50 years, let's say. We're talking about shifting organizations that have existed for centuries, if we're talking about governments in this part of the world. And if you want to sort of cite civic tech back to sometime in the late aughts, when we were starting to see open data groups and hackathons and open data pledges, we're 12 or 13 years in. We're an early teen. And that's enough time to have learned quite a bit. And one of the things I've been seeing because I'm loud on Twitter, I get a lot of questions and so forth, and I get the same questions. And I think that as a field, we need to start making some new mistakes. We've picked up some things, and those of us who have been doing this for a while can share what we've learned. So we want more people doing this, and we want them to be able to skip some of the things that we did that may not have been particularly well informed. So I think not just that I could maybe write a useful book, but that we as a field need a shelf of books. And we have a few. I'm really excited about Marianne Bellatti's forthcoming book, which is about legacy systems, and has the amazing title, Kill It With Fire. So even though I think it is probably a little bit over my head technically, I plan to read it as soon as it's out. It looks really good. But this is kind of where we are as far as the shelf of books. I knew that, I am lucky to be generally known and well regarded in this field, and have worked both at the municipal and the federal and state level, and realized that also, because I had the resources to self-publish, I could set down my learnings just as kind of a marker in a book and see if that would help us all. So I wanted to start there. I did self-publish. That was partly because I didn't know whose list it would fit. There's not a publisher out there who is, there's public policy publishers and there's tech publishers. There's not a lot of people doing both. And there might have been some people I could convince, but even if I did, a typical timeline in standard publishing is maybe 2 years. And I had this idea at a pre-holiday coffee in December of 2019. And I went and got very excited about it. And I actually wrote my outline in GDocs Mobile on my phone in a taxi going home from that coffee. And when I got home, I told my husband, I think I'm going to write a book, and here's what it's going to be. And he said, that's awesome. you should probably get that out before our election. That does seem to have been a good idea. Luckily, I don't know if you heard, but we have a new administration in the US and we're kind of happy about it. Most of us. But whether that happened and we saw a rush of people into federal services who wanted to do technology there, or whether that didn't happen and we saw a rush of people into states to kind of retrench and help states do as much as they could in the environment of a federal government that didn't really want to provide government services. That was why a book, and why last year, and why this particular book. So I'll just close that piece by saying, maybe you, and I'm looking at all of you across the Zoom, maybe you should write one. Consider whether your voice would really be useful to somebody else in this field. And in that vein, we're going to talk a little bit about innovation, but I'm also happy to take a few process questions about writing a book if anybody is interested. I hesitate to say homework, but Civic Tech Toronto was kind enough to send out a sample chapter so that we have a basis to talk about, but don't worry about whether you've read it or not. It's not required. It's a chapter about innovation, and it's called Innovation and Its Discontents, because I think that innovation is a tricky and cloudy concept and one that can sometimes lead us astray, and yet one that is woven throughout so much civic tech conversation. So I just want to pose a few of what I think are key questions about it, and then I want to jump into Q&A. So, why is innovation such a special word? How is this different from reform, which were often what past efforts to change how government did things were called? And how is it different from, for example, doing something that's been tried a few times but better, or improving efficiency? And are we attached to those differences? Why does innovation in government so often involve an outside group? And is that okay? And are we missing some things in terms of the kinds of ideas and clever workarounds and building that people inside may have been doing for a while? And if we frame innovation in that way, does it leave anybody out? It's often the case that early prototypes and kind of racing ahead to build the fastest thing does leave people out, does leave out accessibility, does leave out communities, can even leave out things like just simple bilingualism or languages. Is that okay in a public sector context? And are there times, or might there be times, when slowness is a feature rather than a bug? And I get into a number of examples and so forth, but I feel like you don't have to have read all the examples for us to kind of talk about this whole area. And I hope some of you have been meditating some questions to bring up.